Our mailbag episode is here, and we're going to talk about a bunch of things, including who are the best under the radar 2025 NHL draft eligibles. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, with Sebastian and Hadi, Director of European Scouting for Dobber Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be looking at our mailbag and answering some questions from our listeners. We're going to start off with an interesting question here in terms of the underrated 2025 NHL draft eligibles to look out for. Also some questions along the lines of which teams that have drafted in the top 6 in the last 2 years, which, by the way, are the exact same teams. Which of their hauls would we take first? And a bunch more, including a bunch of questions from our Habs fans and all that kind of stuff. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on to like and subscribe, leave us a comment down below, letting us know what you think of the episode, what you want us to talk about next, and all that great stuff. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, as usual, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started right away here with our first question from James Connolly, a listener of the show. Who are some of the under the radar 2025s to look out for? And you started with an interesting name that I don't think gets enough recognition in Victor Eklund. Talk me through his game, his connections to the NHL, because he has a brother who is an NHL prospect playing for a pretty good team. Talk me through all that.
For sure. Well, first of all, I'll preface this all by saying that under the radar 2025s, when we are still in July of 2024, it mainly includes guys that are going to be first rounders in terms of the rankings and where they are likely to end up on draft day. At the current projection, that so much can change still, obviously, but these are players that I think could be ranked a bit higher from the very preliminary rankings and perhaps aren't being talked about quite as much as they deserve to. And Victor Eklund, as you mentioned, is one of those guys for me. I watched a lot of him, especially in the playoffs and at the Hockey Allsvenskan level this past season with Jurgens. And he's a 5'11", 161-pound right shot left winger who is playing with a fantastic player, Linus Eriksson, and during all my Eriksson viewings, I constantly watching Eklund as well, and he was so consistently standing out. He's a dynamic player, a great skater, fantastic puck handler. He's a really, really creative force, and he scored 4 points in 15 Hockey Allsvenskan games, as well as 25 points in 30 J20 games this past season. And overall, he's a player that I think has a bunch of skill in his toolkit. I really like the pace in his decision-making and his creativity. And overall, he is a really, really fun player who definitely takes a page or two out of the playbook of his older brother, William Eklund, who is already one of the better players in the San Jose Sharks organization as a, 20-year-old, 21-year-old? He's still very young. But Victor Eklund is a bunch of fun, and I cannot wait to track his development. And the next two players that caught my personal eye are from the US NTDP and players that you've also watched. So I'd love to hear what you think of them as well. And the first one is William Moore, and he is a 6'2", 161-pound left shot centerman. He's a really good two-way player, and he's so fast. He's a fantastic skater. He moves around the ice so well, and he has a big frame. I think he might weigh in actually heavier than what he's listed at right now, and he's able to use his size as well to protect possession and also get involved in board battles. He scored 25 points in 35 USHL games last season, and at the U17 World Championships, he scored 5 goals and 12 points through 7 games. This is a player with a lot of skill, but also a lot of intelligence and some really refined habits. He is a bunch of fun. And the other one, perhaps somehow my favorite of these 3 players, and not entirely due to his name being Little John, LJ, and that's LJ Mooney, one of the best names in the draft class, and a profile that is going to be an interesting one, and is going to be talked about a lot in this draft class because he is 5'6" and under 150 pounds. He's a right shot right winger, and he's very, very small. but he is absolutely fantastic. He never stops working. He has a lot of Zach Benson flair in his game, in how he approaches the game of hockey, how he's able to get by as an undersized player. And he's just so much fun to watch. At the U18 World Championships, he scored 2 goals and 6 points through 7 games. And he also scored 23 points in 32 USHL games last season with the NTDP. And I'd love to hear your input on him as well, because I don't think that there were like even 5 players I enjoyed watching more at the most recent U18 World Championships than him.
He is a tiny ball of energy and fun. He's just so enjoyable to watch, and I cannot wait to see what he does this next season, and also how much he can add to that kind of frame. Because whether we like it or not, how many 5'6" players have ever played in the NHL? Like, there's Nathan Gerby, maybe a couple other guys that I can't name off the top of my head, but players that small usually have a lot of trouble kind of scaling their game up. But LJ Mooney, the intelligence, the energy, he just outworks absolutely everyone. He's been able to handle guys bigger than him his entire life. So I don't think that's going to be as much of a concern as it is with other prospects. But for me, still, it is a hurdle. But overall, the skill level, the intensity, the energy, the work rate, the defensive reliability. You mentioned Zach Benson as a comparable. I think that's really apt in terms of how he compensates for his lack of size. Just incredibly intelligent, incredibly energetic, really fast, really skilled. Lot to love with LJ Mooney, and I don't think he's going to get enough love. Even heading into June, I think this is going to continue to be a problem because, again, he's 5'6" right now. Maybe adds a couple inches and a couple pounds to his frame, but we'll see how that works out. I do want to talk about a couple QMJHL prospects, though, that are worth mentioning, in Philippe Veilleux of the Val d'Or and Caleb Desnoyers, who was a principal QMJHL prospect to come out of the 2025 NHL draft. He plays for Moncton in the QMJHL as well. With Veilleux, you've got a really intelligent player who's learning to use his skills better and better with each passing year. Put up like 48 points in 60-something games this past season with Val d'Or, which is a decent but not overwhelmingly good program. And he's been doing really good over there. Meanwhile, Caleb Desnoyers has been his name's been floating around for the longest while. He made a couple rosters for international tournaments for Canada. Really intelligent, really skilled playmaker with a decent frame. He's got some room to add weight, but I think, this offseason is going to help him out in that. He's like 6'1", 161 pounds. Really intelligent, really smart, great decisions, great effort level. Inconsistent mainly because of the skating issue. He does have a wasteful stride that I like to call, where a lot of energy goes into his strides and not a lot of energy goes out of them. But that's one thing that I feel like you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone by fixing his skating problem, because you'll fix that waste of energy and make him more energetic throughout his shifts. But we have another really interesting question here, which might take a bit of time. We'll talk about Rob's question here. He asks, the same 6 teams have picked at the top in 2023 and 2024. So the same 6 teams selected in the top 6. So how would you rank Chicago, San Jose, Columbus, Montreal, Anaheim, and Arizona/Utah's hauls in the last 2 years? So namely Bedard and Levshunov, Celebrini and Smith, Fantilli and Lindstrom, Demidov and Reinbacher, Carlson and Seneca, and Simashev and Iginla, in terms of who you'd want to start a team with. Now, this is a really interesting question, which I think we could even spend a whole episode on. But to sum it up, the way that we've ranked them is at the top, Bedard and Levshunov, and that's mainly because of how good Connor Bedard is. Like, that's just yes. A given. After that, we have Celebrini and Smith at second. I think that's a fantastic haul of a pair of centers. And after that, Fantilli and Lindstrom from Columbus. At fourth, we have Reinbacher and Demidov as a haul. At fifth, we have Leo Carlson and Beckett Seneca. And at sixth, we have Dmitry Simashev and Tij Iginla. So that's how we rank them. The reasoning for example, Celebrini and Smith over Fantilli and Lindstrom is the quality of Celebrini. I think is a decent notch above the quality of Fantilli. Whereas Smith and Lindstrom, for me, although they're fundamentally different players, I think they've got similar quality in terms of how much value they offer to a team. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. I think I might favor Lindstrom slightly between those 2 players, but that could also just be a little bit of recency bias. I've watched a lot more of Lindstrom in the last year than I have of Will Smith, but no, it was a tough one to rank overall, because I think apart from like the Bedard haul at number 1, which was mainly just Connor Bedard being Connor Bedard, which really cemented them there in that spot, and also Artyom Levshunov being a really good 2-way defenseman for a variety of reasons that we're actually going to delve in later on in the episode with another question. But yeah, 2 and 3 was a bit of a toss-up. 4 and 5 was also a toss-up for both for the two of us. There was a lot of competition there in terms of, we think that Demidov's probably the best player drafted between Montreal and Anaheim in the first round in the last 2 seasons. But Leo Carlsson's a pretty close second, and Beckett Seneca probably comes in third, with Reinbach coming in fourth overall. But the raw upside that Demidov brings is something that we had as a bit of a tiebreaker there. And lastly, the Utah/Arizona haul makes sense that they come in sixth, considering that they picked sixth in both of these draft classes. So they didn't have the option to pick any of the players picked by the other teams ahead of them. But Simashev and Naginla is also a fantastic haul. Dmitry Simashev is a great two-way defenseman, a really, really good rush defender, and he's physical, he's intelligent, he's composed, he's refined, he's a very polished player. And Tija Ginla is going to be a fantastic forward to continue to build around, who's also going to pair so well with Logan Cooley.
Absolutely. And that wraps things up for our first segment. We're going to get into our second segment where we talk a bit more about the Habs prospects. We'll get into that in just a second. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Game Time. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to get them. Game Time is safe, secure, affordable, and really easy to use. They've got tickets up until the last minute before the event starts, and sometimes even an hour after the event starts, you can still get tickets over at Game Time. And Game Time is not just for sports. It's for anything that requires tickets, whether you're going to a comedy show, want to watch some theater, music, you name it. Anything that requires tickets, Game Time has it, and has it for a great price. And they're obsessed with saving you money. They've got a bunch of deals to help you save: flash deals, zone deals, last minute deals where you can get up to 60% off on last minute tickets over at Game Time. And the Game Time guarantee makes sure that you always get the best price for your tickets. If you find a ticket in the same section in a row for less than what Game Time has to offer you, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. To take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, download Game Time, create an account, and use code Locked On NHL at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super easy. You just create an account, use a code Locked On NHL, and you get $20 off your first purchase. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's hop right into our second segment. But actually, just before we get into that, as of recording this, the news just came out that Brock Faber just got extended for 8 years at $8.5 million. What a haul for the rookie defender. Were we expecting this at all on a random Monday in July? Like, this is... what kind of an announcement does that come to you? Like, this is astounding.
This is great. I love this. I mean, on the one hand, I love this for Brock Faber, who in 1 year went from being a really underrated prospect who's very good at hockey and didn't get the recognition he deserved for that, to signing an 8 times $8.5 million contract extension. And we'll see how that turns out. I think it's a relatively safe extension for a player with just a single season under his belt. Like, he was the model of consistency and solidity and just intelligence from the blue line for Minnesota last season. But this is a massive show of trust and belief in this player from the Minnesota front office.
Jesus, oh my goodness, good for him. Good for him.
So happy for him.
Right. Absolutely. So we got a bunch of questions to go through here. Let's just keep rolling through them. So first and foremost, a great friend of mine and a colleague over at Habs Eyes on the Prize, Patrick Bexell, the head of European scouting on that side, asks, how good is Philip Eriksson and what type of expectations should we have from him? And Philip Eriksson's really interesting. He was drafted in, I want to say, the 7th round. Was it the 7th round in the 2023 draft, or was it the 6th? I don't have his page in front of him. Yeah.
It was the 6th round, 165 overall.
Got it. Yeah. So Philip Eriksson is really interesting for a 6th round pick. Just this past year, his progression this past season has been fantastic. First and foremost, lit up the Hockey Allsvenskan, which is not an easy league to light up. Scored a point per game essentially in that league. Did fantastically there, and showcased a lot of progression in his skills. Eriksson's always been kind of a really pro-ready, really kind of developed and polished prospect at a young age already. His two-way game's refined. His skating's really, really good. And he uses that combination to put pressure on defensemen on the forecheck, to back check hard, to get in the right spots, anticipate play. He's a constant scanner as well, which is another thing I look for when I look for pro-ready players. Always head on a swivel. But what really stood out this past season is the skill level, especially in his shooting. I mean, his one-timer mechanics are so polished, are really, really good. On top of that, he's got a decent wrister. He's able to shoot in motion. One thing I've really caught in this game is he catches a lot of pucks in motion when he's receiving a pass or retrieving a puck. He's moving his feet through the reception. He doesn't need to stop moving his feet to corral a puck. So it makes for a really fluid game. The only thing that gives me pause regarding Eriksson is I still think that his decision making and his processing speed are things that need a lot of work. He tends to panic under pressure. He tends to be really easy to kind of force into mistakes when you pressure him hard and quick and early on his receptions. But when it comes to anything that involves time and space, I have very little notes regarding Eriksson's weaknesses. It's just that everything about his game kind of tends to falter as soon as you pressure him hard and don't give him enough time and space to make a play. But yeah, you've watched a decent amount of him as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I've liked him a lot for many of the same reasons. I thought he was fantastic in the Hockey Allsvenskan playoffs as well as the SHL playoffs this past season. And his off-puck movement, I thought, was something that really opened up so many offensive opportunities for his team when he was on the ice, whether he ended up getting the puck himself or just ended up creating space for his other teammates. I thought that the off-puck routes are a big area of strength in his game. But yeah, as you mentioned, he's a pretty lethal shooter. He has a really wicked the one-timer itself I haven't seen flash too much just yet, but the snapshot and the wrist shot are fantastic. And yeah, he's a very fun player who's progressed massively since being drafted, and he was also very much off the radar, especially among like in the public eye, because he only played 13 games in his draft year, 11 of those at the J20 level, 2 of them in the SHL, and that lack of opportunity allowed him to fall in the draft. And had he played at a similar level as he did as a D+1 in his draft year, he would have gone way higher up the board.
Yeah, I fully agree. Philip Eriksson is a super interesting prospect for the Habs. I'm really curious to see how it goes on there. But in terms of expectations, I still don't see anything past the third liner, maybe because of, mainly because of that lack of processing speed and quick decisions. But if he can develop that, I mean, there's a lot of upside there. Let's move on to the next question here from Kevin Simard-Hainu, who asks, does William Trudeau have the tools and smarts to make it as a 6th or 7th defenseman in the NHL? I think so. He's a very composed, very poised defenseman, makes really good decisions on the puck. Great breakout passer as well. He's not an overly physical defender, so if you're looking for shutdown guys who'll throw the body in the playoffs, he's not your guy. But really intelligent, really poised, really composed. Reminds me a lot of Jordan Harris in increments and in flashes in his game. I think that Jordan Harris is a better skater and overall a better thinker of the game, but it's kind of the same profile with William Trudeau. I think he's got enough qualities there to be a decent NHLer. In a bottom pairing role. But again, I don't think NHL teams tend to favor those guys, especially once you get to the playoffs, to the postseason, and you need that physical element. I think he's probably going to be edged out by some other options, especially in Montreal with Arbor Jacki and Jaden Struble, and the list goes on and on and on in terms of physical defensemen that the Habs have in their system. But let's move right on to the next question here. And this is from Terry. He asks, I'm not seeing a lot of love for Artyom Levshunov in any prospect rankings recently. What are your thoughts on him? Seems to be kind of a forgotten D. Even Bogdan Konushkov gets some love, but not him. Yeah, talk me through it. I mean, I love Artyom Levshunov. I've made a video on him. I know him very well, but you're director of European scouting. You've watched a decent amount of him as well. So talk me through it.
He's amazing. He's a fantastic prospect in the Habs system. I mean, he's 6'2", 190 pounds. He's a left shot. Not the biggest guy in the world, but he's incredibly mobile. He's really intelligent on the puck. He always has his head up, looking for options and scanning the ice. He has a very good mental map of both his teammates and the opposition on the ice. And he's just as strong in the breakout and launching attacks from his own zone as he is at creating in the offensive zone. He's become a lot more comfortable at activating offensively from the blue line at the SHL level. He's not the biggest shooting threat when he's activating, but he's a really good passer, and a lot of his passing is very just calculated and perhaps not like the Hail Mary passes to get the primary assist on every single play, but always trying to build incrementally and create advantages, and to also just create small area 2-on-1s or 3-on-2s and kind of play those odds a little bit. And he was a really important piece for Regula the last 2 seasons at the SHL level, and he played fantastically in the playoffs. I mean, in the regular season this year, he played in 51 games and he scored 22 points, including 4 goals. And then the playoffs, which was also a very big playoff run for Regula, where they played in 15 games, he logged 4 assists in that run, and he will be off to the AHL with the Laval Rocket this season, where he will finally be very much in the spotlight of the Habs fandom, which I think he deserves to be in. And I think he is one of the better defensive prospects in the Habs system. Like, after you get past the tier of players like Lane Hudson, like David Reinbacher, I think in the next tier of players, Adam Engstrom is very well in the mix, and he's a very intriguing player that deserves to have his fair share of recognition here. But to wrap up the second segment, we have one more question on a Habs blue liner who has some similarities to Engstrom in certain facets, and that's Bogdan Konyushkov, who was a mid-round pick, 4th rounder for the Habs a year ago. I know Carolina had their sights set on him as well, which is always a good sign when you're drafting out of Russia. And he's a really good puck-moving defenseman. He's very intelligent on the puck. He's already a KHL captain at this young of an age with Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod under Igor Larionov, and he's been munching massive minutes despite not being the biggest offensive defenseman. I mean, this is a 6 foot, 172 pound right shot D who put up 6 goals and 28 points in 65 KHL games this past season, which was 3 more points than he put up the prior season. And yeah, he's a decent enough skater. He's mainly just an intelligent player who knows how to make small adjustments to his positioning, whether it be his like relative to the opposition and the puck, or even when he's on the puck and to protect possession. He's just a very solid, calculated player. Not the most dynamic force in the world, but a good distributor in the offensive zone. Does a lot of the small things really well, and I think he has a very good shot at becoming a number 5 in the NHL someday.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing I'd say is Engstrom and Konyushkov play the same game, but in different ways. I think Engstrom uses his skating to compensate for his processing deficiencies.
For sure. Yes.
Whereas Konyushkov uses his processing to make up for his skating deficiencies. That's the main thing.
Exactly.
Konyushkov's skating is all sorts of weird, but yeah, I think he's still going to be a decent NHLer. I think there's decent odds that he makes the NHL. But that's our second segment done. We'll get into our third, where we get into some more questions from our listeners here and close the episode off. But before we get into that, a quick word from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Alrighty, so let's close things off here with our final questions from our listeners here, including some very interesting ones about the likes of Artyom Levshunov and all that stuff. Let's start off with that one. Maxwell on how do you two sort of differ on your Levshunov projections? I don't think we differ much. I just think that I have a stylistic preference for a different sort of defenseman, and that's what led me to have Levshunov as my 3rd ranked defenseman in the 2024 NHL draft, whereas he was your first. For me, with Levshunov, it's pretty much the same evaluation I have as you do. Great offensively, great individual tools, especially handling, passing. His shot is an absolute weapon from the blue line. And he's a fantastic skater, great four-way mobility. And we have the same projection of how his development progressed over the past season in terms of defensive abilities. His reading, his processing, his awareness, his decision-making improved massively with each passing month. He went from a very panicky, very difficult to watch player at times at the start of the year to being one of the best shutdown guys in the entire NCAA and winning Defensive Player of the Year in the NCAA this past year. So great season as a freshman, especially since we're talking about a guy who, again, 2 years ago was playing U18 hockey in Belarus. So the progression of this game since then has been fantastic. His year in the USHL was really good for his game. Helped him develop some decent key elements in his game, understand on North American ice. And once he hit the NCAA, it was a tough progression curve, but he got there in the end. And again, won Defensive Player of the Year. So there's a lot of value there. It's just for me personally, Zeev Buium and Zane Parekh just tickle my brain in ways that Artyom Levshunov doesn't quite. But yeah, is there anything I said that you would add to in terms of like our evaluation of Levshunov?
I think our evaluations, as you said, are very similar. But in terms of why Levshunov ended up being my top ranked defenseman, edging out Buyum and Perek, who were also my next two players on the board. I had them back to back to back with those top three defensemen. They were very difficult to separate. But I think that Levshunov has the edge in terms of the physical tools over those two players. And on top of that, I also think that he's going to be afforded more opportunities, perhaps also have an easier path to playing big minutes at the NHL level and gaining the trust of coaches. And I'm also a really big believer that when he gets that opportunity, that he's going to stick with it. He's one of the hardest working players that we've seen in the draft in the last couple seasons, and just a person that you also want to cheer for. Like, just incredibly enthusiastic, and is as competitive as he is charismatic. So he's a player that grew on me significantly over the course of the season, and I thought that he was the most projectable defenseman in this group, especially relative to the two others. And I mean, Buyum is the most refined of the three right now for sure, but Levshunov's physical tools are going to help him so much at the playoff level in the NHL, which was a small difference-making factor for me.
Absolutely. Let's move right into our next question. We'll make this quick. Jeffs_Penguins asks, if you were to give an NHL comparable to Braden Yeager, who would it be? I see Thomas in them. I don't think Robert Thomas is an exact kind of comparison or kind of the right style of player, because Robert Thomas is very much kind of a playmaking center who kind of stumbles his way into goals, whereas Braden Yeager, it's the opposite. He's a goal-scoring center who kind of stumbles his way into assists. I see William Karlsson as a lot more of a comparable for him. Yeah. I think it took us a while to get to it, but I think if that's the closest you can get in terms of a comparable, in terms of an NHL comparable for Braden Yeager. There's a couple prospect comparables, including the likes of, I don't know, Jagger Firkus and those types of guys. There are some decent qualities there. Obviously, Jagger Firkus is a tiny bit smaller, but the same kind of profile of goal-scoring center who kind of stumbles his way into assists.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, Firkus is also a winger, and he's a better playmaker. I'm very high on Firkus, so I take offense to that personally. But.
I know. Fair. I know that fairly well, Sebastian. Let's move right on to our next question here, and it's from Wade Messier, one of our scouts at Dobber Prospects, asks, what does Alex Zetterberg need to do this season at BU to earn himself a draft selection this next summer? Zetterberg went undrafted this past year. I expected him to get drafted, and he was invited to the Canadiens development camp. So that's going to be an interesting progression from him. But yeah, he's going to BU. I think the main thing with Zetterberg is getting less peripheral, accessing the slot a bit more, using his playmaking a bit more to connect with players. He's a great shooter. I like the playmaking in flashes. I want to see more of it, more consistency on that side. I don't really think that trying to get Alex Zetterberg to be a high-end defensive player is a good use of resources. I don't think that that's a good path to follow. But overall, with Alex Zetterberg, I think there's enough there to be drafted. I think he should have been drafted, and if it wasn't for the fact that he's an undersized peripheral player, he would have been drafted. So just upping the ante in terms of effort level, in terms of processing, in terms of inside play, inside contact, those types of things, because he certainly has a skill level of a top 2-round player. It's just a matter of adding more to his skill set and rounding it out. But let's close things off here with our final question from Y2 Jace. When projecting a future Habs lineup, I have a hard time seeing Sean Farrell and Philip Meshar establishing themselves, as I see them as top 6 or bust type players. What's your opinion on that? I'll let you go on on Sean Farrell. I'll give my thoughts on Philip Meshar.
Yeah, I think Sean Farrell is less boomer bust than Philip Meshar is. I think that Farrell has a lot of tools in his toolkit that could serve him in a bottom 6 capacity. He's a high motor player. He's also very versatile, whether it be in his defensive implications. Like he's again very high motor. He reads the play very well. He's an intelligent player on both ends of the ice, who can really shut down play defensively, get into the dangerous passing lanes, and support as a winger in the defensive zone. The skating could definitely still use more work, which has been the weakness going back to his draft year season, but it has been steadily improving, but could still use a decent amount more beyond that. But offensively, it's the combination of a really good one-timer as well as high-end playmaking ability, and the smarts that support both of those, I think, could really allow him to establish himself as a depth scorer down the lineup. I don't think he needs to play in a top 6 to be effective, whereas Philip Meshar, I could see struggle a little bit more in more of a depth role than Sean Farrell, but he's also a couple years years younger, so he hasn't established the same like depth of surrounding tools to support a more versatile game that like Farrell has in the past couple seasons. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think especially in the past year with Philip Meshar, he showed a side to his game in terms of versatility and defensive ability that I didn't see since his draft year. I mean, in his draft year, he was playing pro hockey in Slovakia, and for HK Nitra, he was very much a defense first, energy first type of winger, and didn't really have a lot of opportunities to flash his playmaking skill, his 1-2 plays, and all of that. But when he got to Kitchener, he tried to really lean towards that offensive side and didn't work too well. I feel like he's found a soft spot right now. Sorry, not a soft spot, a sweet spot in terms of how he balances out his offensive game and his defensive game. And for me, he was one of the best players on Kitchener this past season. I don't see why people are so low on Philip Meshar. I really like the playmaking skill. I really like the skating ability, the effort level, the energy, the motor's decent. Defensive abilities and awareness especially is really good. For me, I think that he's going to have a pretty interesting transition to the AHL game, which should be this next season. And, in terms of the overall process with Meshar, like, he's still a first-round value prospect for me. I don't really see what the issue is that everyone's seeing. Like, yes, he hasn't popped off in terms of production and scored 2 points a game. But at the same time, he's not necessarily always playing with Carson Raykoff. He spent a lot of time away from his line. So for me, it's just, I like what Philip Meshar brings, and I'm curious to see what he does in the AHL, and I think he's going to do a decent job. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you think of the episode, what you thought of the questions we answered, and what you want us to talk about next. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, as always, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we finish off July and head into August for the off season. This has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian and Hadi, and we hope you tune in next time.